Number 10. Sir Douglas Mawson. Sir Douglas Mawson went on an expedition to Antarctica over 100 years ago and had the worst time of his life. He departed Commonwealth Bay on November 10th of 1912 after arriving in the polar region from Australia. He and 2 other explorers went on foot, taking with them 3 sledges to be pulled by 16 huskies. They had about 1,720 pounds of food, plenty of survival gear, and all the necessary scientific instruments. They traveled about 300 miles in just over a month, moving inland across Antarctica. But then things started to get strange. One of the dogs was spotted eating her own babies after giving birth. One of the explorers nearly fell through a crack in the ice. Douglas himself had accidentally split his lip because of the cold and he was in terrible pain. And another member of the party had snow blindness. It was looking pretty grim. Soon enough, one of the team members fell into a crevice and died. He was about 150 feet down into a crack of ice, taking all their food with him. The others had no choice but to turn back, but soon the second man perished, leaving Douglas Mawson alone in Antarctica, 100 miles from the nearest person. What followed was a horrifying trip in which Douglas Mawson was ravaged by the cold. His skin melted off from lack of nutrition mixed with frostbite. And by the time he finally got back to base camp, broken and weak and just moments away from death, the rescue ship had already gone back to Australia. He was forced to stay a second winter in Antarctica, but may have been for the better, as the team left behind at base camp was able to nurse him back to health. Number 9. Jose Salvador Alvarenga. Jose Salvador Alvarenga spent 438 days stuck in the Pacific Ocean. He had nothing but a 25-foot fishing boat with no sail and no motor and no hope of survival. His nightmare began on November 17, 2012, when he set off from Costa Azul, Mexico, for a 2-day fishing trip to catch some sharks. He went 100 miles offshore with his fishing partner, hoping to make a little bit of money in the small coastal village where they lived. Even though both men knew a storm was coming, they didn't think it would be a big deal. And according to Jose, it wasn't the storm that caused the problem. The problem came when the engine gave out, and the 2 men had their boat thrashed for 7 days by the storm out at sea. They lost the radio and their fishing gear. By the time the storm passed, the 2 men had nothing but a bucket between them. Their boat had also drifted very far from Mexico. Lost at sea, Jose managed to catch fish without using a hook or line by literally snatching them out of the water. But fish did not prove enough. Jose started catching seabirds that landed on the vessel near them, then eating the birds like raw chicken. Jose and his companions then drank the birds' blood to sustain themselves. Jose's friend died after just 2 weeks out at sea, and somehow Jose went on surviving for over 400 days more until he landed on the Marshall Islands and was saved by locals on the beach. He did make a full recovery, and he was flown back to his native country of El Salvador, though Jose has never again gone into the ocean. Number 8. Ricky McGee. In Australia, a man named Ricky McGee survived in the Outback for 2.5 months by eating nothing but frogs and snakes and lizards. His car broke down on January 23rd while he drove along the Bunteen Highway, straddling the border between the Northern Territory and Western Australia. For whatever crazy reason, he then decided to wander away from his vehicle. And it was at that point that he got lost and ended up wandering deeper and deeper into the Outback. He had no idea where he was, which direction he was supposed to go, or how he was supposed to survive. Ricky built a primitive shelter near a dam, drinking the water he found there and catching small reptiles wherever he had the chance. This went on for a while before he pushed the rest of the way through the Outback. It took 10 weeks for him to finally make it back to civilization, at which point he came across a man named Mark Clifford, who'd been managing the Birrindudu cattle station. Ricky had lost almost all of his weight and was quickly taken to the hospital. But even after Ricky made a full recovery and was discharged from the hospital just days after being admitted, the authorities could not locate his vehicle. Nobody could figure out where he began his journey into the Outback or what happened to his car. Someone either stole it or Ricky was dropped into the middle of the desert by aliens. So what do you think happened to Ricky's car? Let me know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, then please be sure to hit that thumbs up and the subscribe button if you haven't already. Number 7. Angela Hernandez. Angela Hernandez from Oregon accidentally drove her SUV off a cliff in California and plummeted 250 feet into a remote beach below. It all happened on July 6th, when the 23-year-old woman was passing through Big Sur. Something moved in front of her on the road. She swerved to avoid the critter and she went right off the shoulder. Angela blacked out after her crash, and when she woke up, she was trapped in her vehicle as it was filling with water. According to Angela herself, she could feel the water rising over her knees. She managed to swim to shore and she passed out. Angela would spend the next few days dehydrated, disoriented, and injured. She had nothing to eat, she had nowhere to go, and she was stuck at the bottom of the cliff, unable to get back up to the road. The worst part is that she could hear and even see the cars driving past on the road above, but she was hopeless to catch their attention. This poor woman was stuck for 7 days in absolutely horrendous shape before a couple finally decided to take a leisurely hike along the beach and heard Angela's screams for help. The couple ran to the woman's aid. They called the police, and rescue services soon hoisted Angela up the cliff and then airlifted her to the hospital, where doctors found she had a brain hemorrhage, a collapsed lung, fractured ribs, and broken bones. It was amazing that she survived 7 days sitting on a rocky beach getting splashed by salt water. Number 6. Real-life Tarzan. Ho Van Tine spent 41 years living in the forests of Vietnam after fleeing from the war. This guy's the closest thing you'll ever find to a real-life Tarzan. He was an army veteran who fled from his small village in 1972. With his infant son after a bomb dropped by forces from the United States of America killed his innocent wife and his other 2 children. Ho and his son retreated into the forest in the Tay Tra district of Quang Ngay province and weren't seen again until 2013. Since locals found them 8 years ago, Ho and his son have been adapting to civilized society. But before that, they've been kind of living in tree houses and wearing loincloths like Mowgli. They typically hunted monkeys and rats, but nothing was off the menu, including snakes and bats and any fruits and vegetables they could get their hands on. Even though Ho had spent much of his life in civilization before fleeing into the jungle, his son hadn't. He hardly spoke any Vietnamese. He had no concept of time except for day and night. He knew nothing of the outside world and had not seen a woman once in his 41 years of living. He literally had no idea what a female was. But even more amazing than females were light bulbs and electricity, which the 41-year-old jungle boy had never witnessed. Number 5. The Robertson family. In January of 1971, the Robertson family climbed into their yacht and sailed away from England. 18 months later, they found themselves being attacked by a group of angry killer whales while out at sea. The killer whales actually destroyed their yacht and forced the family to board a leaky raft. They only had enough water for 10 days, and all they had to eat was a tin of biscuits and some oranges. They were at constant risk of sinking. Plus, sharks were circling them in the water too. Amazingly, the Robertson family did survive. The entire family went on living by hydrating themselves on turtle blood and eating whatever kinds of creatures got close enough to their raft to catch. Finally, a Japanese fishing boat happened upon them. The family was so dehydrated that none of them had peed for over 20 days, and their tongues were so swollen that they couldn't speak. The ship took them to Panama, where the family celebrated the rescue with a huge breakfast of steak and eggs. Number 4. Ada Blackjack. Ada Blackjack was born in the small settlement of Spruce Creek, Alaska. Her father died when she was young, and her mother sent her to a Methodist mission school far away in Nome, one of the most remote towns in the world. She married when she was 16 and had 3 children. Later, she got a divorce, which left her destitute. Then in 1921, she joined an Arctic expedition led by a Canadian explorer named Alan Crawford. Her job was to sew fur clothing for the expedition team. The expedition team was sent to Wrangel Island north of Siberia to claim the island for Canada. The conditions almost immediately turned bad. Rations ran out quickly. The team couldn't kill enough animals to survive. And within 4 months, 3 of the men abandoned the mission and tried to cross 700 miles of frozen Chukchi Sea to reach Siberia. Ada was left behind with a member of the team named Lorne Knight, who was suffering from scurvy. Ada cared for the man until he finally died on June 23rd of 1923. The 3 men who had gone in search of help were never seen from again, and Ada was alone in the middle of nowhere. Amazingly, Ada used her traditional skills to survive in the brutal conditions until she was rescued 8 months later in August. Newspapers at the time called her the real female Robinson Crusoe. Ada used the money she earned from the expedition to take her only surviving son to Seattle, where she cured his tuberculosis before remarrying, having another son, and then moving back to the Arctic and living until the age of 85. Number 3. Ernest Shackleton. Ernest Shackleton was an Antarctic explorer who led the fateful Endurance expedition from 1914 to 1916. He was chosen for his first Antarctic expedition in 1901 and joined a group of people who attempted to journey to the South Pole. They got closer to the South Pole than anyone before them, but Shackleton never finished the trip and had to go back home. He returned to the Antarctic in 1908, and he got even closer to the South Pole. And when he returned to Britain, he was knighted. But it was in 1914 when Shackleton made his third trip to the Antarctic on the ship Endurance. The vessel became trapped in the ice and sank 10 months later. By the time the ship sank, Singleton was living with the remaining crew on a floating piece of ice. It was brutal living. And after 2 years of misery in the Antarctic, Shackleton finally set off with a small crew of 3 boats and spent 16 days crossing the ocean before they finally reached a whaling station. Once there, Shackleton recruited help to go back and then rescue the rest of his crew. This is one of the most amazing stories of Antarctic survival because not a single member of the expedition died. Every single person survived, and Shackleton even went back to the Antarctic again in 1922 to circumnavigate the continent, but died of a heart attack before he could ever complete it. Number 2. Lamia Flight 2933. When Lamia Flight 2933 crashed in the Colombian mountains back in 2016, 71 people were killed. Only 6 people survived the horrifying incident, with one of them being a man named Erwin Tamiri, who told newspapers that the only reason he survived is that he followed protocol. He claims that he survived the air crash with minimal damage to himself because he put his bags between his legs and contorted himself into the fetal position. He also says that while he was doing this, he witnessed passengers rising from their seats and running around screaming. If his story is to be believed, then the next time you get on an aircraft, well, you better take that safety manual out from the seat pocket in front of you and get to reading. Luckily, those survivors didn't really need to hold on for too long. Rescue crews reached the wreckage of the aircraft quickly to evacuate the bodies of the deceased and get the survivors to a hospital. The reason the plane crashed at all is apparently because it never had enough fuel to reach its final destination. The pilot gambled and lost, resulting in dozens of deaths and broken families. Number 1. Anne Rogers. Anne Rogers was 72 years old at the time of her harrowing tale of survival. She was an ordinary Tucson resident who got lost on a remote part of the Fort Apache Indian Reservation after running out of fuel. She sat in her car for 2 days and never saw another vehicle pass by, so she wandered off to look for help. And she ended up in the Arizona wilderness, surviving by eating desert plants, drinking from a creek, and building small fires at night to keep warm. She was lost in the desert and nobody knew where she was. It would be over a week until she was found, and only because an officer from White River Tribal Game and Fish found her dog wandering loose in the wilderness. When an aerial search team found the remains of one of her shelters, she was finally spotted by her signal fire, waving at the aircraft. When Anne was rescued, she was in pretty rough shape. She'd spent 9 days in the wilderness and was pretty rugged, but Anne made a full recovery and even managed to get some gas to fill up her car, which was right where she left it. After a woman in Florida kicked out her boyfriend, she was absolutely shocked to find him trying to sneak back into her house through the cat door. The boyfriend's name was Charles Tucker Jr., a 33-year-old man who got stuck in the cat door and died. The girlfriend phoned the police when she found him. They arrived approximately 4 minutes later, but Charles was already dead. He was found with one arm through the door and his head crammed in beside it. He obviously had not been able to fit his body through that cat door. He was just way too big. Police think he was trying to reach up to unlock the door, while this desperate ex-boyfriend's attempt at seeing the girl who kicked him out of his house resulted in his death. Imagine trying to break into your ex-girlfriend's house like a creepy stalker and strangling yourself in a cat door. Who knew that one door for a little kitty could be a death trap for a grown man? Now that's a dumb way to die. Number 9. The Hickey of Death. In Mexico City, a 17-year-old boy died from getting a hickey. According to the reports, Julio Gonzalez had to get emergency medical treatment after he suffered convulsions at the dinner table. And it all happened after going out with his girlfriend. Unfortunately, the paramedics were not able to save him. But they did find a huge purple hickey on the boy's neck, and the doctors believe it was the hickey that caused him to convulse and die. But how is that even possible? Doctors say the hickey formed a blood clot that traveled straight to the young man's brain, causing him to have a stroke as he tried to eat dinner. According to a stroke expert contacted by CBS News New York after the story, this kind of thing is highly unlikely, but it is indeed possible. Neurologist Dr. Mitchell L. Kind says direct pressure on the carotid artery can be enough to tear the vessel, resulting in a blood clot that rushes to the brain. It's incredibly rare, but it does happen. There was even another recorded case of a 44-year-old woman in New Zealand becoming paralyzed in 2011 after a hickey gave her a blood clot in her heart. I can only imagine how horrible the boy's girlfriend must have felt after she found out that sucking her boyfriend's neck ultimately caused his death. So let this be a warning to you, love bites can kill. Number 8. Grandmother pipe bomb. Yet another death has occurred because of a gender reveal party. A 66-year-old woman named Pamela Cray Meyer was pronounced dead after she was killed at a party in Iowa. It was being held for her kid who was about to have a baby, making her a grandmother. Well, she'll never be a grandmother now since a piece of shrapnel from what is being called a pipe bomb hit her in the head and killed her. This happened in Knoxville on a Saturday afternoon when the gender reveal contraption, a homemade device stuffed full of gunpowder, exploded and sent metal shrapnel flying all over the place. She was standing about 45 feet away and it still hit her. According to ABC News, the woman died at the scene. Marion County Sheriff Jason Sandholt said the family had gathered for what was supposed to be a happy event, but the makeshift device filled with colored powder and gunpowder didn't work the way it was intended. The family had gathered outside to light a fuse on the device when it immediately exploded. The device was made out of a metal tube and covered with a board. It was basically a pipe bomb. The shoddy craftsmanship resulted in the death of an almost grandmother. So maybe next time just bake a pink or blue cake or pop a balloon with blue or pink confetti. And just 2 years ago in Green Valley, Arizona, a different explosion set off at a gender reveal party sparked a massive wildfire which burned down 47,000 acres of the Colorado National Forest. The guy that did it had to pay over $8 million in restitution and serve 5 years on probation. People are trying to get way too creative with these reveals, and the results can be deadly. Number 7. Death by car wash. A 39-year-old man in Texas has been killed in a freak accident. It's arguably one of the most embarrassing deaths that you've ever heard of. This poor guy died after getting stuck inside of a car wash in the middle of a normal Friday afternoon. Paramedics were called after witnesses saw what was happening to the poor guy and quickly began life-saving measures. And they did actually manage to get him to Parkland Hospital pretty fast, but unfortunately it was too late and he was pronounced dead upon arrival. But just how exactly did this guy get stuck inside of a car wash? According to the police, he was an employee at the Washmaster's car wash and had been working around the machine and then, by some ridiculous twist of fate, ended up getting stuck inside of the spinning equipment. It was a total fluke accident. The poor guy basically got cleaned to death. And authorities are now investigating how exactly this happened so that hopefully it never happens again. Does this give you fear of car washes? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're at it, like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. Number 6. Taco Tuesday to death. Who doesn't love tacos? I love tacos. You probably love tacos. Everyone kinda loves tacos. Well, this family probably has no love left for the popular food item. The family of a California man is suing the organizers of a taco eating contest after the poor man died during the festivities. The family is claiming that it was negligence that resulted in him dying because of eating too many tacos on August 13th of 2019. The suit was filed by Marshall Hutchins, the 18-year-old son of 41-year-old Dana Hutchins, who died after choking to death on a taco. Marshall claims that his father was not made aware of the kinds of dangers and risks associated with taco eating contests. But let's get real here. Everyone who enters a taco eating contest is well aware of what they're doing. The plain fact of the matter is that Dana Hutchins was not ready for the challenge. He'd never done any events similar to the taco eating contest and was clearly an amateur. He collapsed only minutes into the eating contest. The coroner determined that he died from stuffing too many tacos into his mouth at the same time and then choking. As embarrassing and dumb as it is, filing a lawsuit isn't going to change the fact that Dana died trying to eat a taco. Number 5. TikTok Blackout Challenge. In more tragic news, a young boy died after being stuck on life support for 3 weeks following his participation in a deadly TikTok challenge. The tragedy occurred when Joshua, only 12 years old, was discovered unconscious on March 22nd after he choked himself into a blackout in response to something going around on TikTok known as the Blackout Challenge or the Passout Challenge. It's also being called the game of choking, speed dreaming, and the fainting game. The Colorado boy was on life support for 19 days before he died. Now here's the deal. TikTok is inadvertently responsible for a lot of accidents and a lot of silliness. Young kids aren't quite developed enough to understand the dangers all around them. But to be fair, choking yourself unconscious is a pretty downright poor decision. Hopefully this kind of thing doesn't happen more and more as younger people spend increasing amounts of time mimicking what they see on the internet, including crazy challenges that threaten their lives. Number 4. Boba blockage. A girl in China has died because of bubble tea. Yes, for real. This young girl was only 19 years old when she bought herself a delicious bubble tea. You may also know of bubble tea as boba tea or pearl milk tea. It's super popular in Taiwan and China, and if you've never had it before, it's basically a delicious tea with large balls known as pearls that you can chew on while you're drinking the tea. But apparently these pearls can be quite dangerous. The young girl in China got too many of them stuck in her windpipe, and ultimately they choked her to death. But what's really crazy is that the girl was with her friends, and they tried to help her get the pearls out of her throat, but nothing could be done. The girl's hands turned black. Her friends rushed her to the hospital, and even though a doctor performed cardiopulmonary resuscitation, she still died. And all because she wanted some tea. Even though this doesn't happen often, some medical experts have warned that bubble tea can actually be very dangerous. It's extremely easy to choke on the round pearls due to their slippery texture. In the case of this poor girl, it was actually her asthma that killed her. The pearls got lodged in her windpipe and caused her to have an asthma attack, which ended up being fatal. Number 3. Magic gone wrong. The body of a magician was recently found floating in a river after the magician failed to pull off his magic trick. There's nothing more embarrassing as a magician than botching one of your own tricks in the public's eye, but failing your trick so badly that you end up washed out in the river takes things to a special level of stupidity. The incident happened in India. Chanchal Lahiri was trying to complete an escape trick inspired by Harry Houdini, in which he was submerged underwater and bound in chains. He had his hands tied behind his back, his legs bound with rope. He was supposed to free himself from the chains and the ropes and then resurface. This guy was so serious about his trick that he even had a crane lower him into the water. But after 30 minutes, the witnesses became extremely concerned and called the authorities. Lahiri had performed a similar illusion in 2013 when he escaped from a locked cage submerged in a river. But onlookers could see him use a door to set himself free, and they were so upset about him trying to trick them that they assaulted him when he got out of the water. Much to everyone's disappointment, this time, Lahiri never figured out how to get out of his chains and the ropes. People magazine reported that Lahiri had been trying to revive interest in magic by doing extreme tricks. And drowning in a river probably didn't help. How do you feel about magic tricks like this? Let me know in the comments. Number 2. Vaping tragedy. Imagine wanting to fit in with your friends so badly that it ends up killing you. That's exactly what happened to a 15-year-old kid in Texas after becoming the youngest ever victim of e-cigarettes. This guy literally vaped himself to death. The teen's identity has never been released to the public out of concern for his family. But we do know that the Texas teen was the 57th confirmed death related to vaping. According to the CDC's latest reports, there have also been at least 2,600 hospitalizations because of vaping. Those are outrageous numbers. It's even been called one of the fastest and most serious epidemics to ever sweep across the United States, disproportionately affecting kids and teens. The CDC has even advised people against using vaping products and warned them to look out for symptoms like chest pain and fever. At the end of the day, nobody really knows just how dangerous vaping is. But we all know how much teenagers like doing it. And it's kind of hard to imagine anything dumber than dying from vaping. Before you try to be cool and fit in with your friends who all vape, just remember this story. Number 1. Sucked into the machine. In China, a factory worker met his doom while placing what appeared to be a sheet of newspaper onto a printing press machine. This happened in a paper mill factory. The poor guy literally got sucked into a giant spinning spool. And to make things worse, the whole ordeal was caught on video. The employee was tinkering with the machine, probably doing the same thing he did every day. And suddenly his arm got stuck inside the spinning wheel. Within just mere seconds, he was sucked into the machinery and then terribly mangled by all the spinning equipment. It started and finished in the blink of an eye. Even though the worker's colleagues rushed to his aid, he was already gone. There was no trace of him after being slurped into the huge industrial machine. It was kind of like something out of a Final Destination movie and honestly a little hard to believe. While we don't have any news reports confirming his condition after the terrifying incident, it's safe to say he was probably ripped to shreds. Back in April of 2015, Chris Blows was nearly killed by the most dangerous shark in the world. He was in Fishery Bay, South Australia, when a great white shark estimated to be over 18 feet in length emerged from the water and tried to bite Chris in half. The horrifying encounter left him with only one leg and stuck in a coma. He was in the coma for 10 days before he recovered, though he never did grow that leg back. The shocking part of the story is that it took Chris 6 years of legal battles to finally gain possession over one of the shark's teeth that became stuck in his surfboard during the attack and was later seized by the police. Because of an Australian law that prohibits people from possessing any part of a protected species, Chris was not allowed to keep the tooth. But considering the shark literally took a piece of him, it really only seemed fair that Chris be allowed to keep a piece of it as a souvenir. According to Chris himself, he would never in his wildest dreams kill a shark for its tooth. He also said that because it took one of his legs, he sees no reason why he can't just have that tooth. Finally, his legal efforts paid off and he was awarded the tooth. Although what exactly he plans on doing with the morbid souvenir is really anybody's guess. He has said that he would like to show it to his grandchildren one day, and yeah, that's a lot cooler than probably any souvenir from an airport gift shop. Number 9. The worst first surfing lesson. A mother of 2 has been left in tatters after suffering a freak accident at the beach in Queensland, Australia. The accident turned her life into a disaster after she was left a paraplegic. This happened to a woman named Roisin Clark in December of 2019 after participating in her very first surfing lesson. Roisin was 35 years old and eager to get in the water. She had never taken a surfing lesson before in her life. So she showed up to Maroochydore Beach in high spirits, but during the lesson, something went horribly wrong. She felt some pain in her abdomen and thought maybe she had just worked herself a little bit too hard. But it was after the lesson, when a friend was driving her back home, that Roisin suddenly lost all feeling from her ribs down. At first, she thought the pain was just making it difficult to walk, but the truth was that she was literally becoming paralyzed second by second. It sounds like something out of a horror film, right? And you're probably wondering how this could have possibly happened. She'd only been surfing tiny waves and she hadn't fallen off her board or otherwise gotten hurt, and to be honest, even the doctors were puzzled when she went to the emergency department. As it turned out, she had likely suffered from something known as surfer's myelopathy, an extremely rare injury that happens because of hyperextension of the spine. This leads to vascular damage and irreparable hurt to the spinal cord segment. In other words, surfing those tiny waves hyperextended her spine, and she gradually was paralyzed. And she's going to be paralyzed for the rest of her life. What would you do if you knew you were slowly becoming paralyzed and you only had a few days left to walk? Would you freak out? I probably would. Would you beg doctors to save you? I'd probably do that too. Or would you learn to accept it? Tell me in the comments section below. Number 8. Shark Tank Surfer. Aaron Hirschhorn was the CEO of Gallant, a startup company that had been given $500,000 on an episode of Shark Tank. His company was experimenting in stem cell therapy for pets, and it was a fantastic idea, and Aaron was on his way to success. But the Miami-based entrepreneur and father of 3 children never reached the top because he died in a surfboarding accident off the coast of Florida. According to the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, Aaron had been surfing using a motorized surfboard in Biscayne Bay when he smashed into a boat. He was reported dead at the scene. And unfortunately, we don't know whose fault the accident was. We know that Aaron hit a Chris Craft 38-foot motorboat and likely died from injuries sustained in the collision. He either hadn't really been looking where he was going or the motorboat came out of nowhere. Then again, motorized surfboards are insanely hard to control and they're pretty easy to crash, so maybe it was nobody's fault at all. So far, no charges have been filed against anyone. No other injuries have been reported, and Aaron's family is devastated by their loss. Number 7. Surf ski gone wrong. A French junior ocean racing paddling champion, only 17 years old, got into a devastating accident after taking on a wave that proved way too big. Kilian Marzin, originally from New Caledonia, was surf skiing with his father in the west of France. And if you're not sure what surf skiing is, it's basically a mixture between kayaking and surfing. A surf ski is about 22 feet in length and much quicker than a kayak. It can also be used for hitting some serious waves, and riding them just like you would with a surfboard, only sitting down. Marsden and his father were going along a familiar route, just paddling a few miles for practice, but the two men took different paths. They were supposed to meet at Stellage Cay in an hour and a half, but something went wrong. Marsden was paddling along strong incoming tidal currents, and everything seemed to be all right when he suddenly noticed some exceptionally clean waves that he thought would be fun to ride. Marsden rode the first two, and they weren't really that big, but then a third, absolutely huge wave broke across his board and collapsed on top of him. And the pain was immediate. The wave crashed into him. Like a falling boulder, and Marsden felt excruciating agony in his arm. The wave also knocked him off his board. When he resurfaced, there were more giant waves bearing down upon him. With the use of only one arm, he managed to get on his surf ski board and paddle away. And it turned out the wave hit him so hard that it dislocated and almost broke his shoulder, and he's lucky to still be alive. So would you rather get hit by a freak wave or maybe take your chances with a shark? Tell me in the comments section below. Number 6. The Pie Maker. A beloved San Francisco man famous for baking delicious pies has been killed in a tragic surfing accident. His accident was a simple one. While surfing at Fort Point in the early evening, he got hit by a giant wave that knocked him against a rock and killed him. The wave was like a giant fist that punched him into the rock. And according to friends at the scene, they gave him CPR and did chest compressions, but nothing brought him back to life. And all because of a stupid rock. What makes this story particularly tragic is that the pie maker, Haroon Wesley, has been recognized as a hero by the American Red Cross because he saved so many people throughout the years who also got caught out in dangerous surf of the San Francisco Bay. At 60 years old, he'd still been going strong as a professional surfer, but his body just couldn't take the damage from that rock, which he smashed against so hard that it caused internal damage. He spent a week in the hospital unconscious before his injuries eventually took him for good. Number 5. A glimpse of death. Legendary American surfer Billy Kemper had a scary brush with death just a few years ago when he was lifted by a towering wave while surfing and then brought back down on a rock with such force that he was knocked unconscious, his lung collapsed, his pelvis split down the middle, and his knee blew out. He had so many injuries that frankly it would take too long to list them all. The impact on the surfer's body should have killed him. In a recent interview with CNN News, Kemper detailed what happened in the accident, and quite frankly, it sounds horrifying. Kemper says there was a short moment of complete calm before he impacted the rock. While the wave was throwing him around, when he couldn't tell which way was up and which way was down, he suddenly experienced a second of complete peace in the violence of the wave. Then the lights went out as he was dropped onto the rock. The accident happened in early 2020 in Morocco. By his interview in 2021, he was in surprisingly great shape, but he'll never forget the pain he experienced after being pulled out of the water with his pelvis basically in half. Number 4. Killed by lightning. Catherine Diaz Hernandez began surfing at the young age of 9. A native of El Salvador, she'd been planning on qualifying for the Olympics at the age of 22. And if all had gone according to plan, she may have represented El Salvador at the 2021 Olympics, assuming that they went on as scheduled in Tokyo. Unfortunately, Catherine Diaz Hernandez will never make it to the Olympics or any other surfing event. And this is because while she was training in early March for the ISA World Surf Games, the qualifying event for the Tokyo Olympics, she was struck and killed by a bolt of lightning. As you can imagine, this is one of the most unique and bizarre surfing deaths that has ever been recorded. Nobody even knows how it happened. It was a total freak accident. Surfers die from shark bites all the time. Surfers drown. Surfers break bones, but surfers don't generally get struck by lightning, especially not those headed to the Olympics. The accident happened in El Tunco, and even though bystanders were able to quickly get Catherine out of the water and onto the shore, she could not be revived. This has been extremely sad for the community and of course for Catherine's family. And she was a very successful young woman known for her impeccable skills as a chef. She had her own business in El Tunco, and of course, she was supposed to lead her country to gold in the Olympics. Number 3. Deadliest wave. Pro surfer Malik Joyo was enjoying his time surfing in Hawaii when he was killed by a deadly wave. Malik recently came into the spotlight after mastering some of the most treacherous waves at the famous surf spot at Teahupo'o. He was a real up-and-comer in the world of surfing. A native of Tahiti, Malik joined 60 other surfers at 10:30 in the morning on Oahu's North Shore. at a famous local spot called Pipeline. Everyone was ready to cruise some waves, but when Malik dropped into a thick peak, he ended up falling backwards and smashing into the bottom of the wave with a force that probably felt like falling from a skyscraper onto concrete. Eyewitnesses saw him sink into the water, and moments later his board popped up, but there was no sign of Malik himself. His board was shattered and his leash must have somehow come undone during the wipeout. 20 surfers rushed into the water to try and find him. They had no luck. It wasn't until later that surfers found him 250 yards north of Pipeline and badly injured. They put his body on a longboard and rushed him to the paramedics, but they couldn't revive him. The paramedics stuffed him into an ambulance and rushed him to the hospital, where he later succumbed to his injuries. So let this be a lesson to all of us. Surfing can be dangerous, and you're at the mercy of Mother Nature when you do it. Number 2, California collision. In 2021, a surfer in California wanted to hit some waves to escape the nightmare of the pandemic, and his escape ended up being the death of him in what has been called a freak accident. The man was identified by the Los Angeles Times as Jerry Hilhool, 51 years old. He collided with another surfer on a wave and injured his head, and the man he collided with also suffered a head injury and was taken to a nearby hospital, but it was Jerry who got the worst of it. According to Fox News, he was pronounced dead at the hospital. Jerry had some pretty famous connections in California. After the incident, close friend Mandy Moore praised him as being a towering presence. Jerry used to serve as the tour manager for the band Dawes and was a loving father. The incident that took his life occurred at Rincon Point. The reason Jerry collided with the other man is that Jerry had been riding down the face of the wave while the other person was surfing in the water below him. Neither of them saw the other, and by the time their heads banged together, it was just too late. Jerry's life ended in a flash. Number 1, shark bite. A teenage surfer, a boy of only 14 years old, experienced one of the most terrifying moments in his life when a shark emerged from the water and chomped down on his leg at North Beach in Hawaii, nearly killing him. The young man's name is Parker Blanchette, and he's used to seeing sharks when he's out surfing. He grew up with them, and maybe it was his closeness to sharks that had him feeling so complacent in the water. Whatever the case, he was surfing for about 3 hours when the attack happened. Parker had just finished riding a wave and was about to hop off his board when a shark leapt out of nowhere and bit his leg. Luckily, this 8th grader was able to act quickly. He got back on his board and paddled towards the shore, leaving a trail of blood behind. The entire incident only lasted about a second. The shark really hadn't gotten a good enough grip to sink its fangs into the boy, otherwise he probably would have left that beach without one leg. The shark that bit him was nearly 6 feet long, and that means Parker was extremely lucky to get away with a flesh wound and only 100 stitches. He probably got a hero's welcome back at school, though, after facing certain death and then escaping. How dangerous do you think a jet ski is? You probably see lots of pictures of people having a great time together out on the water. But did you know that this sport could be deadly? In one incident, a man trying to have some fun on a jet ski was killed when he got struck by a 30-foot boat. The boat was carrying around 15 passengers at the time of the incident. But what's really shocking is that even though the boat was filled with passengers, whoever was driving the vessel kept on going right after they ran over this poor guy. They pulled a hit and run and tried to flee from the scene of the crime. Even more unbelievable is that the police didn't catch these perpetrators. They offered a $5,000 reward to anyone with information that would lead to the arrest of the driver, but nothing has been done. Sounds like a case for a detective in an 80s police TV show, right? This happened in Florida, water sports capital of the US, right off the coast of Miami. And it should be a lesson to all of us. If you want to have fun, be careful or you could get run over by a boat. Number 9, kitesurfing superstar. You may recognize Cliff Simon from the program Stargate SG-1. He played the villain Baal and was a fan favorite, but unfortunately for his fans and for him and his family, he died in March of 2021 after getting into an accident on a California beach while trying to kiteboard. He was 58 years old when he went down to Topanga Beach for a bit of fun in the sun. Originally born in South Africa, Cliff was a star athlete. He was a trained swimmer and even qualified to be on the British International Olympic team back in 1984, but he never did make it to the Olympic Games and had instead joined the South African Air Force before going to work as a windsurfing instructor and then eventually as an actor. Alas, Cliff's lifelong athleticism couldn't save him from the tragedy waiting for him on the beach that day. And we don't know what exactly happened either. as his wife refused to make the details of the accident public. But considering the most frequent accidents with kitesurfing involve falling off and crashing into the water or colliding with things like rocks and boats, it's safe to say that Cliff Simon did not meet a very pleasant end. Number 8. Wakeboarding to quadriplegic. A day of wakeboarding turned into a day of horror when Brad Smeal from New Zealand shattered his C4 vertebrae and was left a quadriplegic for life. This means he's going to be in a wheelchair unless scientists in the future come up with some type of medical miracle. The accident happened in Florida when Brad tried to do a double backflip while training at the biggest wake park in the world, located at Lake Ronix in Orlando. The 27-year-old botched the flip and landed in such a way that his spinal cord was injured beyond repair. According to the Daily Mail, he only has a 2% chance of ever regaining the motor skills to the top half of his body. Imagine literally becoming a cripple for the rest of your life just because you wanted to do a backflip in the water. For Brad, that must be devastating. Ever since the accident, Brad has been recovering in Orlando Regional Medical Center. He's still trying to gain the ability to breathe without being connected to a ventilator. And for the longest time, he also suffered from a pneumonia infection. But hopefully he'll be discharged soon and can move on with his life. Brad had been a professional wakeboarder for the past decade, splitting his time between New Zealand and the United States. And sadly for Brad, it looks like his days of wakeboarding are over. Do you think scientists and doctors will ever come up with a way for quadriplegics to walk again? It could involve robotic limbs or other advanced technologies. What do you say? Tell me your opinions in the comments below. And then remember to subscribe to World List for more intense videos like this one. Number 7. Surfer Lightning. Catherine Diaz, arguably the top surfer in all of El Salvador, has been killed while trying to qualify for the 2021 Tokyo Olympics. And you'll never believe the way that Catherine was killed. It all happened after she entered the water at El Tunico Beach, roughly 10 miles from the capital city of San Salvador. She was on her board and she was getting ready to hit some waves, and then out of nowhere, Catherine was struck by a rogue lightning bolt and killed. A streak of lightning zipped out of the sky, crashed into Catherine's head, and the 22-year-old girl was dead on the spot. And this was tragic for countless reasons. It was devastating to the surfing community, devastating to the community in El Salvador, and of course devastating to Catherine's friends and family. Everyone expects to be eaten by a shark or stung by a jellyfish while surfing, and the last thing Catherine had been expecting was a bolt of electricity from above. Lightning strikes that kill humans are extremely rare too. In the United States, about 50 people per year die after being hit by a bolt of lightning. And the best way to avoid a tragedy like this? When you hear thunder, get yourself inside. Number 6. Sailing race tragedy. The San Francisco Yacht Club had 5 of its members killed in a brutal accident off the coast of California back in 2012. It's been called the greatest tragedy ever in the history of the San Francisco Yacht Club, which was founded in the year 1869. A sailboat from the club had been racing around a small group of uninhabited volcanic islands called the Farallones, 28 miles from San Francisco. During the race, the sailboat accidentally crashed into some rocks sticking out from the water. This was after huge swells knocked most of the crew members overboard. By the time the boat hit the volcanic rocks, it was too late. Only 3 of the 8 crew members survived the incident, with the boat being totally wrecked and stranded on the rocks. So let this be a lesson to all of us. The ocean can be a very dangerous place. Number 5. Underwater photography. A British man was practicing a couple of his favorite hobbies while on vacation in Ibiza. These hobbies ended up getting him in deadly danger, as his unconscious body was pulled out of the ocean and paramedics failed to save his life. The tragedy happened while Kevin Smith was practicing underwater photography in a cove near the popular resort of San Antonio. He loved underwater photography and he loved snorkeling. For Kevin, there could not have been a better way to spend his evening. But things went horribly wrong when he experienced difficulty underwater. It's impossible to say exactly what happened when he was down there. He could have run out of air or accidentally swallowed some water while trying to snap a photograph. Whatever the case, the 35-year-old man drowned while taking pictures. It's probably no consolation to his family, but at least he died doing what he loved. If you died doing what you loved, what would they find you doing? Eating pizza? Maybe walking your dog? Taking photographs underwater? Tell me down in the comments section below. Number 4. Spearfish impalement. Spearfishing is perhaps one of the most dangerous things you can do underwater. After all, you're essentially half blind in the darkness of the ocean wielding a giant metal lance that you shoot like a harpoon. It's kind of a disaster waiting to happen, and one man was extremely lucky that he swam away from his spearfishing accident with his life. But he didn't escape totally unscathed. This guy took a spear to his face while underwater. And it's not clear exactly how the spear went through his face, but it ended up entering through his left cheek, puncturing the length of his head, and then exiting out of his right cheek. The spearfishing gun must have gone off by accident. The man, who has not been identified, shot himself through the face, but judging by the pictures, the spear somehow missed anything important. He will undoubtedly live, though not without suffering extreme discomfort and agonizing pain. And this is why you should never play with guns, especially while underwater. Would you rather be shot in the face with a spear or attacked by a shark while diving? That's just a question we may never know for sure. Number 3. Kayak rescue. In Scott County, a kayaking adventure ended in tragedy when a woman and her fiancé got into an accident while kayaking in Elkhorn Creek. The couple went over the dam unexpectedly, and then they got pulled under the water. If not for the quick thinking of a good Samaritan, both kayakers would surely have died. J.C. King was driving home from work when he saw the accident unfold before his very eyes. He was driving alongside the Great Crossing Dam when he witnessed Eduardo Ponce and his fiancée heading straight for the brink. Eduardo managed to get out of his kayak, but the woman was stuck in hers. By the time J.C. King reached the bank to haul the floundering woman out of the water, it was too late for her would-be husband. They could do nothing but look on in horror as he was pummeled by stray logs and other debris falling over the side of the dam. His fiancée screamed his name and pleaded, but there was nothing to be done. Even firefighters had a hard time getting Eduardo out of the water when they finally arrived on the scene. The first responders did eventually get Eduardo to dry land, but it was too late. They tried to resuscitate him using CPR, but according to the Scott County coroner, he was pronounced dead at approximately 8 p.m. The young couple were supposed to be married just 2 months after this kayaking trip. Number 2. Whitewater rafting nightmare. The owners of a whitewater rafting company were jailed in 2013 following the relentless campaign of the parents of a schoolgirl from Britain who drowned after she was thrown from an overcrowded boat. The young girl was only 9 years old and she was on holiday with her family in Turkey. The holidaymakers had thought it would be fun to go rafting, but it wasn't very much fun when their raft capsized as they went down some rapids. They blamed the accident on recklessness, saying that the Turkish owners of the rafting company were negligent and that the trip should never have been described as a family experience because it obviously wasn't suitable for children. The lobbying by the parents has since caused the rafting company to shut down and for its owners to be sent to jail. And to be honest, the owners of the company didn't have a very good case for the defense. According to the Daily Mail, it was found out that they were selling souvenir DVDs for over $40 that showed dramatic footage of rafters being tossed out of boats that capsized against rocks. These boats were designed to carry a maximum of 8 passengers but were often filled with over 12 people. That squeeze to get a few extra bucks per ride cost the owners of the company dearly, as they're rotting away in prison for nearly 6 years. And even now that they're out, it's not like there's much waiting for them because their business is gone. So do you think they deserved what they got? Or was the punishment too harsh? Number 1. Cave diving disaster. In February of 2014, 2 divers perished at a depth of over 300 feet while cave diving in Norway. The authorities at the time claimed it was too precarious to retrieve their corpses. This didn't stop 4 friends of the deceased from going into the cave system and retrieving the bodies themselves, though. 7 weeks after the fatal incident, they descended into the dark and freezing waters to retrieve the bodies of their pals. This is one of the most horrifying caves in the world. It's actually nothing more than a pond on the surface, but if you dive into the pond, continue swimming down for nearly a mile, you eventually emerge inside of a massive cave. It's a hugely popular spot for diving hobbyists who want to admire the underground grotto, but it's only a place you should go if trained and experienced, because it's kind of a death trap. The 2 Finnish friends who died were part of a 5-man team embarking on a 5-hour dive at depths of over 300 feet. Only 3 of the 5 friends ever made it out of the cave, and they did so with debilitating decompression sickness. And yes, the friends did manage to bring out the bodies of the deceased. It was an operation that went on for 5 days. So what's the worst thing you've ever seen while doing water sports? Let me know about it in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, and thanks for watching.